Hi again, it's Naomi Hattaway with Leaving Well, the organization that supports nonprofit organizations and social impact organizations to do better when it comes to the reality that people leave. This is part two of our series on the Catholic Church and its connection to succession planning. Today, we're going to be talking about red hats and the hidden agendas, the politics of succession. So, in part one of the series, the last video or the last podcast episode, we explored the structure of the conclave, how its decision space, predetermined processes, and psychological rituals create a framework for effective succession planning. Sounds really wonderful, but if we're being truthful, behind the locked doors and beneath those scarlet robes lies something far less divine: politics. In the Robert Harris novel Conclave, he strips away the veneer to reveal what anyone who's ever navigated a leadership transition already knows. Succession is ultimately about power. Who gets power, who doesn't, and whose vision for the future prevails. So, we're going to dive in this conversation into the political realities that shape succession, whether it's in the Sistine Chapel or your boardroom. As always, I'm going to be looking over to my left to check my notes while we're having this conversation. I welcome you in the comments or in an email to let me know what you think about this episode and this topic. So first, we're going to talk about the faction game. This is when cardinals choose sides. So in Conclave, the College of Cardinals quickly fractures into factions: the Italian bloc, the conservative wing, the reformist, the Global South coalition. Each has their own candidates, their priorities, and their visions for the church's future. Every significant leadership transition also creates factional dynamics: the old guard versus the new generation, the finance committee versus the program team, the risk averse versus the innovative advocates, the founder loyalists versus the change agents. These factions don't appear on organizational charts, but they do exist through whispered conversations in hallways, strategic coffee meetings, and private text threads. They shape succession outcomes more powerfully than any formal process. In my work with nonprofits navigating executive transitions, it is highly valuable to discuss power sharing and power mapping, which is a process to identify the informal power centers that will ultimately determine succession success or failure. Just like Cardinal Lamelli in Conclave, these managing transitions and those people that are managing transitions must understand these factions without being captured by any of them. Next, let's talk about secrets and scandals, which is the currency of succession politics. In the movie adaptation of Conclave, the most dramatic moments revolve around the revelations of secrets, hidden backgrounds, concealed relationships, buried scandals, and identities that suddenly emerge during the selection process. These revelations don't just create plot twists, though. They shift the power dynamics and completely reframe the entire succession in question. Every leadership transition involves similar information asymmetries. The board member might know about the financial irregularities that others haven't noticed. The deputy director might be aware of the founder's problematic behavior with staff. The longtime volunteer who understands community relationships that's invisible to newer leaders. Information becomes currency in succession politics: hoarded, strategically shared, and often weaponized. And those who control that critical information often control succession outcomes, regardless of their formal authority. Cardinal O'Malley in Conclave navigates this treacherous information landscape by prioritizing institutional integrity over factional advantage. An example of this is that when he discovers damaging information about a leading candidate, he doesn't use it to advance his preferred candidate. He ensures that all the cardinals have the information needed to make an informed decision. It's a really powerful scene in the movie. If you have not watched it, I highly recommend it. The scene is literally when he's asking someone to make copies of this information, and he distributes it to everyone during a lunch. In addition to secrets, there's also identity politics in the most literal sense: the stark identity politics of succession. The conclave represents an extreme case, and we will talk about this in another episode. It's 100% male, the conclave is. It's predominantly European, and it's exclusively ordained within a specific theological tradition. But most leadership transitions also involve similarly complex identity dynamics. In the nonprofit sector, we often witness a predictable pattern, which is organizations founded by white, wealthy, well-connected individuals who eventually transition to a more diverse leadership, but only after the founder has consolidated power, secured funding streams, and established organizational legitimacy. This pattern reveals uncomfortable truths about power and credibility and control in our sector. Founders with, now my cat is in the way, and so I can't see my notes. One moment. Oh my goodness. Founders with privileged identities can access resources, networks, and opportunities often unavailable to leaders from marginalized communities. Then, when succession occurs, these organizations suddenly, quote unquote, discover the importance of diverse leadership, often without, one moment, I'm just gonna, excuse me, this is reality, right? We're just gonna move the cat. Okay, going back to where we were. We were talking about how organizations suddenly discover the importance of diverse leadership, but oftentimes this happens without actually acknowledging how privilege shaped their founding narrative. I've witnessed this dynamic repeatedly with clients. The charismatic white male founder transitions power to a woman of color who inherits all the operational challenges without the founder's structural advantages. Or when the board congratulates itself on its progressive succession choice and then holds the new leader to standards that the founder never had to meet. The conclave, with its homogeneous composition, at least avoids this particular hypocrisy. It makes no pretense of identity diversity. But most organizations, let's be truthful, have to exist in the tension between homogeneous power structures and aspirational diversity commitments, which is a tension that often erupts during succession planning. So effective succession really requires that you name these dynamics explicitly. Which identities have been centered in organizational leadership? Which have been marginalized? How do these patterns shape assumptions about who's qualified and who's not? What unstated identity criteria operates beneath the surface of selection discussions? So let's talk about the boardroom, which is where succession politics really come into play. In the nonprofit world, succession politics centers on a crucial body that doesn't exist in the Vatican model, which is the board of directors. Boards occupy a uniquely powerful position in succession planning. They typically hire and fire the executive director, yet many board members lack the deep understanding of day-to-day operations, which is by design. They hold fiduciary responsibility without programmatic expertise, and they make succession decisions with limited interaction with potential internal candidates. This creates a potential environment. Actually, I shouldn't say potential. This creates an environment ripe for manipulation. Curious if you've ever experienced the following. Executive directors cultivating board allies to influence their own succession. Senior staff attempting to curry favor with board members to position themselves as potential successors. Or founders or foundations pressuring boards to consider preferred candidates, leveraging financial contributions to dominate decision-making. It sounds kind of shady, but it happens all the time. The conclave, for all its faults, operates with relative independence from external financial pressure. Cardinals don't need to worry about donor reaction to their selection, and they don't fear funding cuts if they choose the wrong pope. Most nonprofit successions do not enjoy this independence. They unfold in the shadow of funder expectations, donor preferences, and financial vulnerabilities. A foundation program's officer's casual comment about a candidate can carry more weight than staff consensus. A major donor's enthusiasm for a particular successor can override strategic considerations. Effective succession planning requires creating enough financial stability to make leadership transitions without undue external influence. Now, that may be a pipe dream and a wish list and a magic wand moment, but I think it can happen. This means that we must start developing boards with the courage to prioritize mission over money when the two conflict. It also requires acknowledging the power dynamics that shape succession policies instead of pretending that they don't exist. Let's talk a little bit about the tension between tradition and progress as we start to kind of wrap this conversation up. At the heart of Conclave, the book and the movie, lies the fundamental tension in every succession process, which is tradition versus progress, continuity versus change, preserving institutional identity versus adapting to new realities. The conservative cardinals feel that the wrong successor will abandon core principles. The progressives worry that failure to evolve will render the institution irrelevant. Both believe that the very soul of the organization hangs in the balance, and both are probably right. Every significant leadership transition involves the same existential tension. I have sat with so many outgoing leaders that are terrified that the new leadership will abandon organizational values. I've spoken with young staff over and over and over, and I'm not saying young age-wise, but young in their careers, convinced that leadership transitions represent the only opportunity to address calcified and old practices. I've been in mediation moments where I've had legacy board members who are supporting the original vision and newer board members interested in only innovative directions. The conclave manages this tension through its structure. The cardinals are all products of the institution they're choosing to lead, creating built-in continuity regardless of who emerges as pope. The tradition of choosing a new name upon election symbolizes this balance between individual identity and institutional continuity. Most organizations lack structural safeguards for navigating the continuity change tension, and unfortunately, succession often becomes an all or nothing battle between institutional preservation and radical reinvention, with neither side fully acknowledging the legitimacy of others' concerns. My challenge or my question to you is, what if we approach succession not as a choice between tradition and progress, but instead as an opportunity to clarify which traditions remain vital and which changes are essential? What if succession planning began with an explicit conversation about this tension rather than allowing it to emerge as a factional conflict? We have two more points before we wrap up. The first is the double-edged sword of the founder's shadow. The conclave occurs in the shadow of two profound influences: the 2,000-year tradition of the church and the specific legacy of the most recently deceased, or sometimes resigning, pope. Both shape succession politics in ways that are both visible and invisible. Similarly, most organizational successions unfold in the shadow of founders, whether literally present or long departed. Founder legacies shape succession policies and politics in complex and contradictory ways, often long after the founder's successor takes place. I've worked with organizations where the founder remained on the board after stepping down as an executive director, which creates impossible situations for their successors. I've also consulted with others where the founder departs completely, yet remains so psychologically present in any future decision-making efforts that it regularly devolves into what would so-and-so do debates. The founder's shadow creates succession politics even when the founder is not actively involved. Staff members will position themselves as authentic interpreters of founder intent. Board members will invoke founder vision to advance their own agendas. And funders often reference their relationship to founders to influence succession outcomes. Some organizations address this by creating emeritus positions that honor founder contributions while clearly transferring power to new leadership. Others establish clean breaks through term limits or mandatory transitions. Some bring on people as advisors or ad hoc committee members, and still others create phased succession processes where founders gradually transition authority over extended periods. No single approach works for every situation. While I do strongly recommend that outgoing leadership refrain from joining the board, I will underline, underscore, bold, highlight, italicize that for the rest of my life. What truly matters is acknowledging the founder's shadow rather than pretending it doesn't exist. Succession politics will revolve around founder legacy, whether we name it or not, so it's better to make it explicit rather than allowing it to go unchecked. My final point for this conversation is to create healthy succession politics. I'm not suggesting that we can eliminate politics from succession planning. Politics in the broadest sense of the word is negotiating power and competing visions, and it's inevitable in any leadership transition. The question isn't whether succession will be political, but whether those politics will be healthy or toxic. Healthy succession politics include the ensuring of critical information being shared across power centers rather than hoarded. It also requires that we name identity dynamics explicitly rather than allowing them to operate implicitly. It also manages external influences rather than pretending or faking independence. It also addresses the tension between tradition and progress directly. Are you getting the point? I keep saying this over and over. We have to name these things and name them directly. Healthy succession politics also acknowledge founder shadows while creating space for new leadership. The conclave, despite its flaws, creates conditions for relatively healthy succession politics. It doesn't eliminate human ambition or factional interests or information asymmetries, but it does channel them in ways that typically prevent catastrophic outcomes. I always talk about riverbanks, and the conclave as a system and as a structure creates those riverbanks. So what if we design succession processes that acknowledge political realities instead of pretending they don't exist? What if we created structures that channeled political energy inside of those riverbanks towards institutional health rather than factional victory? This is not about importing red hats and secret ballots into your boardroom, like I said at the beginning. It's literally about learning from a system that has managed succession politics, however imperfectly, for 2 millennia. In our next conversation, we will explore what may be the conclave's most obvious and problematic feature, the complete and utter absence of women from the process, and what this reveals about gender dynamics in succession planning more broadly. If you have questions about this content, this topic, email me. I'd love to hear from you. Naomi@8thandhome.com. That's Naomi at 8, the number 8, TH and HOME.com. In the meantime, until the next episode, please check out our website at naomihattaway.com. There you can take an organizational assessment where you can learn the archetype of your organization's readiness for workplace transitions. You can also explore articles, 3 seasons of a podcast, and learn more about our services. Until next time, bye-bye. Da 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 da.